world as we know it is a very complex place. And it was a little bit overwhelming, and I think I made a formal decision that I'll start with just filming something I know well, my family, and life as it happens around my home, the house that I grew up in North Carolina. That was the beginning for me. And then perhaps I'll do other kinds of films later, but let me start here because I wanted to be sure I understood the technical aspects of filmmaking and could do enough on my own in order to accomplish a film. And so I made a film called Backyard, a short film, 40 minutes. But in the making of that film, I realized that there was a possibility of committing myself to this approach to filmmaking, personal, intimate filming of a world that you know well, but with a certain perspective that perhaps no one else could have, and that appealed to me immensely. It would also enable me to bring in my other interest. I was going to say my other love, except that writing is so difficult I can't really say I love it. But my other love, which was writing, and try to make them work together. And certainly in Backyard I experimented with the juxtaposition of what I was writing and what I was filming. And it gave me an incentive to then go out and do a longer film, Sherman's March, and that was the film I did afterwards. My films have been called glorified home movies, and I'd like to think that's not an insult. Maybe it is. But I think in essence they are home movies. Film de famille. They're films about the intimate excuse me, they're films about the intimate interactions that you have with people you know and love. Home movies are generally portraits of events, birthday parties, Christmas, family gatherings, Thanksgiving. In America we have Thanksgiving. That's usually the subject matter of home movies, and my films have those things too, but I think I was also interested in what happens when it's not a special day. And so in that sense I think it's very different than home movies, and also because of the way I'm writing, my narration as it's woven through this footage, this very mundane footage, I think makes it something a little bit different than the conventional sense of what home movies are. Sure, I've thought about that, and I try to do it with love and sensitivity, and I think generally the films are received in that way. But it's complicated because as children grow older, their lives become more complicated. Your own life becomes more complicated as a parent. And it's not as easy as when they're quite young and they're charming and you can film them running around and being little children. It's different. And I think it becomes complicated in the way that makes it hard to continue to make films in that sense. To be honest, the woman I marry and time indefinite, we're no longer married. And I think one of the big problems she had was the importance of filming in my life. At first it was not a problem. She loved being in my films. And then as time went on, I think she changed her mind and it wasn't so much fun for her. And I think it's not just because I made movies in which she appears. That's not the reason. But there was something about that dedication and obsession of mine with filming day-to-day life, often in the family, that I think made it more difficult for her. And so we're no longer together.
What are these things right here?
That's a microphone.
Does that make sound?
Mm-hmm.
So what? Will that be sound when we show it?
Yes, it'll have sound.
Is that to be in our movie?
It might be. You never know.
I think that there's a moment in photographic memory where my son, who's very young, he's 12 years old, is recording sound for me in a hospital. And because I was making the film at the time, I did not notice that he kept looking away from the subject. And it was only when I looked at the footage later I realized that he wasn't focusing his attention on what we were doing. And later on he was diagnosed with, in America we say ADD, attention deficit disorder. It was there, and I think I vaguely knew that he had some kind of a problem paying attention sometimes in school, but there it was, and actually he had recorded it. In backyard, the way that my father puts his hand on the shoulder of a patient in the hospital. Years later, when I saw that, I realized I do the same thing to my students. You know, that sometimes I would just put a hand on the shoulder to kind of encourage them. And I got it from my father, and there it is. I have this image of my father doing that, and I do it too now. And I find that's something I didn't realize when I actually shot the footage of him in the hospital, that he did that with his patients very frequently. He kind of pats them, you know. It's a way of encouraging, but I do it too.